I think ending with Kara Walker is a way for us to, I mean, besides the fact that she is a fascinating contemporary artist, I think her work deals with a lot of themes that are particularly pertinent to this module: the legacy of racism and sexism through the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, and how we deal with these legacies or not today. She creates projects that are informed but not determined by race. And art historian Kimberly Pinder describes this installation as such, quote, "The reality of a nation of immigrants, the legacy of slavery, and the genocide of native populations presents issues of race and difference, prevent issues of race and difference from being resolved in the US. And those issues are current among American artists. Here Walker conflates sugar, slavery, and the sexual objectification of Black women in one installation in a former sugar factory in Brooklyn. So sugar was once a rare luxury, but it has become the white opiate of the masses, really, and that began with slavery. There were over 4 million slaves in the Caribbean from the 18th and 19th centuries, and they fueled profits made from the insatiable appetite for rum and refined white sugar in Europe. A subtlety is an ostentatious sugar sculpture that would be at the centerpiece of a table at a dinner party hosted by European nobles at this time. And she takes that concept and expands it out and creates this large sphinx-like figure using polystyrene foam coated in over 35 tons of sugar. Walker calls it the New World Sphinx. It's a massive mammy figure, the kind of stereotyped trope of the smiling, large, black, maid nanny figure. She's nude except for her telltale kerchief, and she's posed with her arms stretched up and her rear raised up, exposing her sexual parts. Now, the mammy figure is normally large and cheerful, but here she's a little bit more menacing. As a sphinx, remember, the sphinx is this enigmatic female creature who killed her enemies by strangling them. It evokes awe, outrage, horror, dread, nervous laughter. Some people posed for selfies with the Mammy Sphinx's various body parts, which of course led to discussions about how that sort of posing perpetuates racist and sexist conditions that Walker's work is all about. And then in this old sugar factory, we also see these 5-foot-tall sculptures of young Black boys carrying baskets with fruit. They're made out of another sugar product, molasses, and they quickly deteriorated in the non-climate controlled space. A physical manifestation, a metaphor for slavery's ruination, that slavery destroyed millions of lives. In Walker's most recent work that was installed just at the start of the pandemic and now has been extended in the Turbine Hall in the Tate Modern, is her Fons Americanus, or American Fountain. Now, this is the Turbine Hall where Ai Weiwei installed his Sunflowers installation about 10 years ago. It hosts rotating installations of important contemporary artists. And Walker was chosen for this most recent installation, and she didn't know what she was going to do. The Tate invited her to come visit, and she's taking a cab through London where she sees the Queen Victoria Memorial. This is the memorial that we see here on the right. It's this centerpiece of the plaza in front of Buckingham Palace, and it's this totally bombastic monument to British grandeur. Queen Victoria She's on the top with all of these allegorical statues. I'm sorry, Queen Victoria is here enthroned on the right-hand side. And then she's surrounded with various allegories at the different tiers of, oh, courage, truth and justice, peace and progress. And it was dedicated in the early 20th century, at the peak of Britain's imperial colonial powers. So Walker decides she needed to do her own version of this memorial, a kind of twisted counterpart. And so we see this female figure here, not regally enthroned, but she's kind of contorted at the top, and the water jets emerge from her nipples and an open jugular. Oh, and I don't have a detail of that. And this kind of bastardized Venus figure. So instead of this celebratory winged victory, we have this kind of monstrosity here. And then around the lower tiers, Walker installs allegorical figures of her own that offer a counter program to the Queen Victoria Memorial. Here we see a celebration of empire, and on the left, we're going to see something entirely different. So the text that is included here on Walker's memorial says, "A gift and talisman for the citizens of the old world, our captors, saviors, and intimate family, from that celebrated negress of the New World, Madame Cara E. Walker." And so there's a kind of tongue-in-cheek, here, I think, kind of making fun of the pomp, the grandiose nature of the Victoria Monument. And this continues to in the other motifs here as well, where we see that she is showing us the negative aspects of colonialism. Walker also intentionally leaves the surface of this monument kind of rough. She worked with a fabrication company to develop a process to preserve the handmade feel. She didn't want it completely smooth, but she wanted this feeling of texture and layers that that is a combination of kind of a plaster and resin composite. The idea here is that history is not polished. History is still being formed. History is not entirely set. We still have a lot to learn about who's neglected in history, whose story is left out, whose story is highlighted. This figure that we're looking at here is nicknamed Queen Vicky, a kind of caricature African figure carrying a coconut, whose skirt shelters a figure Ms. Walker calls melancholy. We also see there is this figure here in a boat that references Winslow Homer's painting The Gulf Stream. The boat is, in the Homer painting, is marked Key West. Her sculpture labels the boat K West, which may be a kind of jab to Homer, also maybe a jab to Kanye West. It's partially submerged. And here I think the other reference is to Turner's slave ship, which depicts slaves being thrown overboard in a storm so the captain could collect the insurance money and the slaves were left to drown. We see them here in the foreground of Turner's 19th century work. So Walker is referencing scenes that that deal with the Middle Passage, with the slave trade, and she also includes a figure, let's see here. We also have a figure of a Pietà that I unfortunately don't have a detail of, where a male figure lifts a body whose mangled face clearly makes reference to the murdered Emmett Till. And I think there's not just a reference to the history of slavery and the Middle Passage, but there's also a reference here to the deaths of refugees and migrants fleeing violence and war in West Asia and make a perilous journey across the Mediterranean in hopes of a better life. And many of those migrants have died in that journey. All right, this marks the end of our content for Art 212.